So this video extends to basically any music industry or gear-oriented industry in general, but this channel is about synths and groove boxes, so it's applied to that. So if you're in the synth community, and especially if you decided to click on this video, chances are that you've experienced gas or are currently experiencing it right now. And I'm not talking about ripping ass, I'm talking about gear acquisition syndrome, which has in recent years become a real hot topic in the YouTube synth community because it's something that's very real. There's never a synth or groove box that's enough, and that's because the industry slowly inches ahead and makes small improvements as time goes on. And companies are constantly competing and one-upping each other as well, naturally. Capitalism. And because a lot of us synthies are tech driven, at least to a certain degree, we like things that are tactile, we like to touch things, we like synths. And all of this, unfortunately, is not so easy on our wallets. As you can see behind me, I do own a lot of synths. Like, this is probably 1/3 of my collection. The rest of it is in my closet. Like, if you take a look at my YouTube channel, you'll see all the different gear that I work with, and I receive gear a lot, so it's never gonna end. I'm just gonna keep reviewing new gear, which is awesome. It's gotten to the point where it's overwhelming, and there's certain pieces of gear in my arsenal, for whatever reason, I just haven't got around to really exploring. For me, it's the Mini Brute 2S as well as the MPC 707. There's no reason, and I can't help but feel that there's sort of like a master of none type situation going on here because I have so much gear. And a lot of higher quality synths in my collection do the same thing, so there's a lot of overlap there. It's basically just a preference thing. So in a sense, this is a video for myself as much as it is for you guys, and hopefully you could get something out of it. And I know that most of you guys are in a different situation than me. I'm in a very privileged and lucky position. I mean, I still do spend money on gear, but a lot of my gear has been attained through like an exchange of content. But even though you and I might be in different positions, the premise of this video still applies to both of us. We'll be discussing a few things that revolve around gas, and I'll be giving you guys an outline on how to improve on pieces of gear that you actually own. Maybe unexplored gear in your collection, for me, like the MPC 707 or the Mini Brute 2S. And this concept can, of course, be applied to any synth or groove box in your collection. This video is sponsored by DistroKid. If you're on the hunt for a music distributor, go with DistroKid. They have about 1 million free promotional tools that you could use as a member. And I, without exaggeration, use these promotional tools on every single one of my releases. And we'll be talking about Hyperfollow, which is essentially a free link and bio link. More on that later in this video. So I have a good reason to hold on to all of the gear that I have in case you guys request something in a future video. So as I mentioned earlier, there is a lot of crossover with my gear. If I wasn't running this channel, I'd be much more strategic with the gear that I chose. So let's say you're in a position where you're on the lookout, but you haven't really settled on something yet. Well, here's a general gas pro tip. Do your homework and be wise. As someone who's in the YouTube synth world, we're essentially running synth ads for you guys, like very in-depth videos. Trust me, I know the feeling. There's a certain element of hype when a piece of gear first comes out, and I know that it's because of people like me. So just wait a bit before you pull the trigger. Oftentimes within a week, there's like dozens of videos that you could look through to see if a piece of gear is right for you. Know what you're getting into and compare the piece of gear that you're interested in to gear that you already own. Let's use groove boxes as an example. So if you take the DigiTact, or better yet, the Syntact, huge release, and at this point it's really at the forefront of all Electron gear because it's their newest release. I'd love to get my hands onto it. Talking about the DigiTact though, for example, it's so many things. It's a sampler, it's a sequencer, it's a mixer. It makes for an amazing brain of the operation type deal. Exporting audio is a dream as well. So something else in my collection, maybe something like the TR6S, the OPZ, to a certain extent, the MPC 707, the Polyand Tracker, all of my pocket operators. There's so many feature crossovers there, and yes, they all have their strengths and weaknesses, and they're all fun as all get out. But when it comes down to it, I've spent so much time learning each of those instruments individually. They all have a different workflow, which takes time to learn. With no regrets, by the way. But what if I compounded all that time and maybe spent it on 1 or 2 of those instruments that cross over? At this point, the bar is set pretty high. It could take years to really become fluent with all aspects of, let's say, the DigiTact. Going back to the very relevant Syntact example, I own the DigiTact as well as the Digitone, which are I would say more capable than the Synthact alone. The Synthact does have 12 tracks, 4 of which are analog, which is very tempting, but in my opinion, my grounds are pretty much covered. At this point, the only reason why I'd be interested in picking up the Synthact is for the purposes of this channel to explain to you guys how to use it. So anyway, this is just one simple example. Do your homework and apply this to your gear situation. If you're someone who's just looking to enhance your music game and release music, there's a healthy balance between how many synths you own or how many synths that you're comfortable with and the music that you create and release. To a certain extent, if you've committed to this world, they're gonna get you either way because these companies strategize so that you have to buy more than one piece of their gear. And yes, it is expensive. So let me unpack that statement. What does that mean? Companies will intentionally design gear with holes in it, and oftentimes the next piece of gear that they release will fill in the holes of the first piece. And it's just a never-ending cycle, obviously. So whether you're someone who wants to stick to one company or if you like to mix your gear together with different companies, the OP1 versus the OPZ is a perfect example of this. So the OP1 is a great synth, doesn't have the best sequencer. A few years later, they released the OPZ, which has a very strong sequencer. So you see what I mean there? So as per that example, at a certain point, it's kind of tough to get around those sort of things. You have to strategize and categorize your synths and gear in that way, I think. Believe me, if you start thinking this way, it's gonna help you with your purchases and or finances, and also just the way you think about the workflow of these instruments. And I'm not just saying this because I'm a YouTuber. YouTube videos are the best way to learn about an instrument. I would say better than the manual. Maybe I'm biased, but even before I was a YouTuber, I always went to YouTube to learn about instruments. And speaking of strategies and categories, that's our next topic. I personally think that it's important to understand categories in terms of companies. Of course, there's also types of machine categories, so drum machine, synth, groove boxes, you could categorize in that way. Obviously, it's beneficial to at least have a basic understanding of what each of those machines does, but machines from a given company and even a given generation, they function in a similar way. So obviously the further back that you go, the more there might be a difference between instrument layout and workflow. A great example of this is Electron's machine drum, which I had a chance to see at the headquarters in LA, and it just looked so unlike their current generation, their current lineup, like the Digitac, Digitone, Octatrack, all those. They look very similar. The machine drum is a different thing. Roland is another example. So their current generation of groove boxes, so the TR6S, the TR8S, even the MC707, there's a lot of workflow similarities between those three. Korg Volcas are also very similar to each other. Teenage Engineering, the OPZ is essentially a ×10 souped up version of pocket operators with basically the exact same sequencing workflow. The OP1 is definitely an exception to all of this. It's in a category of its own. There's no other instrument like it. There never will be. With Electron, I learned the Digitone first, and it made learning the Digitact so much easier because there's so many similarities in those workflows as well. The sequencers all work the same. So it's sort of like a you know them all type situation in a foundational way. Obviously there are, unique features with each instrument as well. Another great example of that is the SP series. So the SP 202, 303, 404, and 404 MK2 as well. In my experience, the 303, 404, and 404 MK2 have similar workflows, but then the MK2 has all these new features and just blows the other ones out of the park. If you're interested in learning about the SP404 MK2, there's some videos. I mentioned earlier that I have a MC707 and microbrute that I need to dig into a little bit more. In fact, the 2S I basically haven't touched at all. So here's my approach to learn, improve, and eventually maybe even perform on any given instrument. And I actually don't even start by touching the instrument. I start watching YouTube videos, usually performance type stuff. And by the way, that's actually one of the best ways to find out which gear you actually like, to check out people that are making music with it. Piece of gear might look cool, but if it sounds like crap, if something that is not trendy vibes with you, I would 100% go with that piece of gear over something that's new and trendy or, hyped. And I know it's hard to think that way because all of the newest gear is at the forefront on YouTube. It's what's showing up in your feed. I know, but that goes back to my first point, right? Do your homework. So I'll find tracks that I actually like, and I'll use them as models to set boundaries as to where I could go with that specific instrument. The next step is to just give it a go. Start pressing buttons. I don't even use the manual at this point. I'll just twist knobs and try to figure out what the is going on for hours sometimes. With my personal example, the Mini Brute 2S, I actually own the Drum Brute as well as the Micro Freak, so I would try to make some workflow connections there. Usually this is enough for me to at least piece together a beat or a melody, unless it's like a completely new company or piece of gear that I know nothing about. then I might hit YouTube earlier. Either way, I'm still just going for it at this point. I'm more in a creative zone. I'm not trying to be organized. I'm just trying to learn and explore. So after however long exploring, I would take a break until the next day. When I come back the next day, that's when I start hitting up YouTube videos and trying to learn the ins and outs of the instrument. YouTube videos are the best, but it's really tough to find something that covers every aspect of the instrument. We're lucky to have a massive community of synth users on the internet. Reddit is great, but I find that Facebook is the best for this sort of thing. You could pretty much search any major instrument and find a group on that specific instrument with thousands of people in it. So if you have a very niche or specific question about an instrument that you haven't seen online, type it into one of these groups. You'll probably have an answer within a few hours. One thing though, make sure that you're not asking a question that's super obvious, because then you're gonna get some flack for that. And then of course there is the manual, which is oftentimes my last resort unless I've received an instrument that hasn't been released yet. Sometimes I also like to use songs or riffs maybe on splice.com as an example, and I try to recreate those on whatever instrument. Just given the unique workflow of these standalone instruments, oftentimes if you use a specific riff as an example, you'll land somewhere completely different. And voila, you could possibly have a unique and cool idea to work with from there that is not plagiarized. I think that it's important to find a balance between the technical aspect of your gear and actually making music. In my experience, making music is where you'll find out whether or not you actually gel with a given instrument. Just as a basic reference, I like to keep it about 70-30, so 70% actually making music with a given instrument and 30% exploring the technical side of how it works. I mean, obviously you're learning as you make music as well, it's just a different part of your brain. Just like with pretty much anything, time management is very important. Here's how I look at it. If you look at playing with synths as more of a pastime and you don't really feel like scheduling time is for you, that's totally fine. We all have our synths for different reasons. They could be more of like a therapeutic escape. But if you bought your synths to create music or to enhance your music, then you're definitely gonna have to prioritize your time and make some sort of schedule. It's crazy and overwhelming how capable and powerful these things actually are. So the trick is to just set several times a week, prioritize that time, and whatever you figure out during that time, that's it. Personally, I actually have a tough time with that one, just like stopping and letting your brain absorb what you've learned. I think that setting a timer is key, so just put it on, hit up your synth, maybe start up a YouTube video, make music, hit the forums, time's up. Okay, cool, see you tomorrow. Otherwise, it is hard to know where to start. It's easy to be overwhelmed, especially when you're first starting on a new synth. So set that timer and just go, you'll find your way. This is probably something you've all heard before. More gear doesn't necessarily mean better music. Depending on how you use them, synths and groove boxes are like this weird milieu in between your DAW and more traditional instruments like, you know, bass, drums, something that you're actually performing on. So if you're into DAWLESS setups, there is this performative element to it, like traditional acoustic instruments. But you're also programming your beats and programming sequences, which is closer to a DAW. I mean, it is a DAW, but you're just not running it on your desktop. I think that having a strong rhythmic and melodic foundation is just as important as knowing your way through your instruments. You don't need to be a master or anything, but at least just having a basic understanding of simple rhythms, simple melodies, simple chords, harmony, all that kind of stuff. This is pretty crucial to understand and to enhance your music. Of course, there's sampling as well, and to me that falls more into the rhythmic category. I love sampling because I'm a drummer, and just like everything else that we're talking about today, it's the sort of thing that you're gonna get better at with practice. So find that time to practice, set that timer, and go. Personally, my workflow leans more towards drums because, like I said, I'm a drummer. I'll have a sample over top of that as well, and then oftentimes I'll layer things melodically over top of this sample and the drum. That's what works for me personally. Over time, you'll find a combination that works well with you based on your background. I mentioned holding off on a purchase earlier in this video. I want to dig a bit deeper into that. So it's really easy to get sucked into the hype of a new instrument. Sometimes it is totally rational, like going back to the SP series, the SP404 MK2 destroys all of the other models in the SP series. It's like light years ahead, it has all these new features, and so that's a rational decision. But let's say you have some other like sampling pad type groove box in your collection. Let's say you have the MPC One. The 404 MK2 isn't really necessary. The MPC One is way more capable. I would argue the only thing that the MK2 is superior at is the effects. And I actually have a video on this exact topic. Here it is. And going back to the Syntac, Digitac, Digitone comparison from earlier, What if you own the Digitact or the Digitone, or both of them? New releases are advertised well and they're tasty and tempting, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to enhance the current music making workflow that you already have. There's a lot of feature re-releasing going on. A great example of that is the Roland Boutique series. They're all based off of synths and drum machines that already exist, but because they're so small and cute, they're so marketable. A great example of that, I have the JU06A, and people over on TikTok are like losing their mind over that thing. They just love it. We haven't even discussed software synths yet. And so let me give you a pro tip there. There are a bunch of new synths and groove boxes that are not available in software form. But if you have any experience with a desktop DAW, I highly suggest that you check out if there's a software version of that particular synth. Oftentimes you don't have to buy the software. You're able to just rent it for free for, you know, a trial version. And that's obviously the cheapest way of knowing whether or not a synth is for you. That being said, real hardware synths, in my opinion, are always better, but like I said, it'll give you a good idea. We're in an age where big synth releases and even smaller releases are covered extensively on YouTube on day one. So if you're looking to be smart with your investments or if you're tight on cash, just wait a little bit. Oftentimes YouTubers will release videos about things they don't like about a specific instrument, so keep an eye out for those as well. Comparison videos are also becoming more and more popular. Keep an eye out for those as well. Just give it time. So if you have fallen victim to gas, hopefully this video helped you in one way or another. Now let's talk about Hyperfollow, the link in bio link that DistroKid offers for free. First off, it's $20 a year to release unlimited music on all major streaming platforms with DistroKid. Hyper affordable. If you are someone who's already using a link in bio link and possibly paying monthly for it, like I was just a few months ago, this is a great way to save money. Here's what it looks like. It's super clean. Embed your latest YouTube video, your latest single, social links, other important links you want to lead people to. If I click on My Music right here, I'm brought to a second Hyperfollow page. You're able to claim as many as you want for free. This way my audience could choose platforms that they actually use to listen to my music. This is one of many reasons to go with DistroKid. I really do think they're the best option around. You know where to go for that discount. Thanks to everyone for watching. So if you've done your homework and you're ready to finally pull the trigger and actually buy a piece of gear, make sure to use the affiliate links in the description of this video. That way I actually make a small commission from that sale at no extra charge to you. So if you'd like to support what I do, that's one of the best ways of doing it. If you're not already a subscriber to this channel, subscribe. Share this video with people you think would be interested in it. Like, subscribe, do all the things. Boost the algorithm. Thanks for watching. I'll see you guys very soon. Hacha!